Peter Atkins, thank you very much for joining me today on the Middle-Aged Man in the Bedroom podcast, otherwise known as the Hungry Celluloid podcast. Pete, would you like to give an introduction? I know people don't really like doing that sometimes, but you've got
I'll
such a
introduce you,
long
Frank.
career.
I'll do an introduction, ladies and gentlemen. This is Frank Duffy, host of the Hungry Cellular. No, yes, certainly yes. My name is Pete Atkins, and as you can probably already hear, like Frank, I'm a native of Liverpool, England. Our accent is called the Scouse accent, if you're not listening from the UK. And like Frank, I'm a writer. And also, like Frank, I'm a musician, and we've both had other strings to our bows, plural, don't know.
Just
But and I guess I'm known primarily for I wrote through the Hellraiser movies in the 1980s and 1990s because I'm that old. And I'm a novelist and short story writer, done a bit of TV, been in bands, didn't make it, and here we are today.
So what I'd like to do, Peter, I do this with everyone in the first part of the podcast, which
Yeah.
is I don't want to just jump straight into your career, because as you know, everything we do beforehand makes people into who they are. That's obvious. But you've got such a interesting background anyway. I've read a lot about, your early days before the Hellraiser films, before
Yeah.
the writing career. So I'd like to go back to you were born in Liverpool. Which part of Liverpool were you born?
Well, I was born in a hospital,
Yeah,
so but where I was Wavertree, which
yeah.
again for non-Liverpoolian people, that's a South Liverpool district. I was literally, well, again, not born, but the house in which I lived as a baby was 500 yards from where John Lennon was born, Newcastle Road, and I imagine Newcastle Road's got a blue plaque, but I know Brayton Avenue doesn't. But yeah, but that part of town, Wavertree.
What was it like in those days?
Well, I mean, I know it's such a cliche for people my age to say this, but it is all true. Liverpool was, I want to say, other than London, literally the second most. It mightn't be Coventry might be, but it was one of the most bombed cities
Yeah,
in the German Blitz of World War II. And although the war, I was born in November 1955, so the war had been over 10 years. But as you as you hear from the Beatles and other Liverpool famous sons and daughters of Liverpool, you grew up very much in a real sense of a post-war world. We all the cliches we used to play in the bombed out
yeah.
houses and ruins because it took the city. I mean, certainly a good. There were still bomb sites when I was. I mean, unrestored bomb
Yeah.
sites when I was 10, 12. So it took them a good 20 years to really get back. Um, so Liverpool's a blue collar town, primarily a maritime town traditionally. Obviously, primarily because of the Beatles, but with a long tradition before and after. Also, very much bizarrely an arts town, not just musicians, comedians, actors, writers, obviously athletes. Um, so it was probably much like other blue collar towns in England in the late 1950s and early 1960s, except we probably had that extra chip on our shoulder because we
Yeah.
got bombed so much and the place still looked like ruins. I don't want to exaggerate it, as you know, Frank. I mean, uh, most of Liverpool survived the Blitz, but there was still that sense of we're in recovery mode.
Yeah.
And I think probably my sociological history is sadly lacking in precision. But I think I'm right in saying the maritime trade was essentially in decay.
Yeah.
So there was an unemployment problem in Liverpool. Yeah, God, I'm making it sound miserable. It was also a great place to grow
Yeah.
up. One reason being, and then I promise we can get onto a second question.
No, no, this
But
is great.
one of the great things about it, and This is probably still true for your generation, though it didn't need to be as true. Liverpool, because it was a major shipping route, Liverpool, New York, for the Cunard liners and the trade ships, freight ships. Liverpool was spoiled in a way, good way, that other cities weren't because the youth of Liverpool had access to two very important things for generation before me, my generation, and the one after, which was rock and roll records and
Yeah,
comic books that weren't yet traditionally or legally imported into the UK. There was a whole grey market in Liverpool. So I was reading Superman and Batman comics before they were officially released. And as we all know from every Beatles documentary we've ever seen, the Beatles and the other Merseybeat bands were getting their hands on these
yeah.
well, for the UK, relatively obscure rock and roll and R&B records. So that was definitely a plus. They used to call them the Cunard Yanks, scousers who worked on the boats. They'd come in, and I guess it gave them extra swag. Actually swag literally in the old sense
Yeah,
of
yeah.
booty, and swag in the modern sense of swagger, because they'd come into the pubs and it's like, yeah, I've got these books, these records, these magazines. So the Cunard Yanks were like the sort of the cool guys who brought these treasures from afar.
Because Liverpool's always had a reputation for being a friendly city, but a hard city. I guess you could still say that's true today.
Yeah.
Could you feel that kind of reputation? And even as a kid, even though that's your natural environment, it's not like you're walking around going, "We're hard." But I mean, could you feel that it was a hard place to grow up?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think very it probably accounts for, all the schizophrenic nature of all the art we all produce because um we're famous for our sense of humor, as they say. But there were also, I mean, even as like a 7 or 8 year old, I mean, there were terrifying fucking kids in our school.
Yeah, yeah,
There were, I mean, my junior school, I'm thinking about. And I don't want to name the lad because he's probably grown up to be a lovely, respectable, but he had a head like Frankenstein's monster. I've never seen like a flat skull like this kid had. And he came from, a tough family.
yeah.
His dad had been in trouble here and there. But I remember all of us, most of us, I think, not, terribly wimpy and cowardly. But this kid would walk around the schoolyard and be like, fucking hell. You just, and anyway, he was an example of a whole bunch of people like that in Liverpool. It was a tough town. And so I think partly, I mean, against like cheap psychology 101, isn't it? But I think there is some truth that the famous Liverpool sense of humor is in some ways a protective coloration. Because if you, if you're too weedy to stand up to the bully
Yeah.
physically, make them laugh and then they love you, you know. So yeah, I'm sure like yourself, yes, very aware of both. I think it's probably true of most blue collar towns
Oh,
in
yeah,
the
definitely. Yeah,
UK anywhere,
yeah,
that you get there's a homeliness, a friendliness, a togetherness, great sense of humor, and some real fucking bastards, some terrifying,
yeah,
terrifying
yeah.
thugs and criminals all over the place. So, swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
What about your school? Were you at a Catholic school?
No, I was christened Catholic, but I did not go to what would it have been, St. Eddie's or SFX or
Something like
I
that,
think my
yes.
dad went to St. Eddie's. I went to infants and juniors. I don't know what terms they use now.
I,
Primary and secondary, whatever they call them now.
I think the whole infant and junior thing is just under the primary umbrella now.
Is that right? Yeah.
I
It
think so.
used to
Yeah,
be, I think it was like 5 to 7, you were in infant school,
yeah,
7 to 11, you were at
yeah.
junior school, and then high school or senior school, as we called it. So, no, I just went to a regular in Wavertree. Hay Green Road was my county primary, which it was called, and both infants and juniors. Um, that was local, but a bus ride away. And then my senior school, because I was a little smarty pants who passed me 11 plus, I went to the Blue Coat, which was, I get this is different for American listeners. We it's a grammar school, but grammar school means something different in the US. The Blue Coat was a grammar school, boys only grammar school, uniforms, four houses, just like fucking Hogwarts.
Oh yeah,
Um,
like St. Patrick. I was in St. Patrick's.
okay, yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And the great thing about the Blue Coat, well, actually, in retrospect, there were several great things about the Blue Coat, but it was. Oh, well, I mentioned earlier, John Lennon was born in Newcastle Road. Blue Coat School was opposite Newcastle Road on Church Road in Liverpool. So it was literally a 3-minute walk to school for me. So that was handy. Um, but yes, it was technically, I guess, an Anglican school. I
Okay.
mean, we started with morning assembly and hymns and all that stuff, like every school in the UK did then. I assume they don't now, but I don't know.
No
But
idea.
yes, it wasn't Catholic. In fact, I'm probably going to hell because I was never confirmed. I was christened Catholic, but never followed through. So yeah.
Peter, I'd like to expand on what we were talking about, which was growing up in Liverpool. And we talked about
Yeah.
school and the lovely nature of teachers in general. Um, what about the way that people, what were people like in those days, though, in terms of the way that parents interacted with the children? I mean, I know there's a lot of differences in the class system when you hear stories from different
Yeah.
people from different backgrounds. And what was it like then in terms of the way that men and women behaved, and how did they regard younger people?
Huh. Um, Interesting. I've probably been blithely assuming that parental situations, neighbor situations, general social interaction situations were kind of the same as they are now. And of course they're not. Um, but I've actually never given much thought to. There's a couple of obvious things, which again, I apologize, are almost cliched in the sense that people always cite them. Um, this is not, it'll be more interesting talking about teenage stuff, excuse me, I think. But the big obvious thing I think that is very noticeably different now in both the US and the UK is we're not kidding when we people who were born in the mid 1950s, I'm sure right through to the 1970s, when we say, yeah, we didn't have phones, and we left the house 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning, and said to your mum, see you at tea time.
Yeah,
That was true. And we disappear. Obviously I'm talking about summer
yeah,
holidays primarily here, not. But this was true of like any days you were off, weekend days or bank holidays or whatever. The kids would just bugger off somewhere and spend their day playing or getting into trouble away from their parents or any concerned adult. And and most of us lived. Most of us were not abducted or trafficked or murdered. And most of us didn't ourselves abduct, traffic, or murder. We were uns we were not aware that we were unsupervised and free. Like I'm not trying to pull any strokes on children today who are maybe overmanaged by their parents, but it is true
yeah.
that I don't know if I don't know if our mothers were secretly concerned or stressed. I don't think they were. Um, they just figured you'd be back at 5 o'clock
Yeah.
for what most civilized or middle class people call dinner, but most working class kids call, especially in the north of England, as you know, Frank, we called it tea.
Yeah.
So I'd be back for tea at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and so would everybody else in our street, wherever they'd
Yeah.
been. And I think this was pretty much true from the age of 7 or 8,
Yeah.
even. I mean, it sounds very unusual when you say it now, but I
Yeah.
th I think that's true. If you had a bike, which most of us did, you got on your bike and you probably didn't have a plan,
Yeah.
but you got on your bike, you went somewhere, you met some mates, you went to the shops you like, and whatever. And certainly by the time I was 12, I think that was like the magic summer for me when I was 12. My mum was a big movie fan. So she totally encouraged me. Because again, kids, if you're listening now, this is a world in which your opportunity to see a film was when it was in the theater, the cinema or the movie theater. And you couldn't see it again until it came back to a cinema or 3 or 4 years later might show up on television, which you couldn't record. You just had to stay in and watch it if it showed up on telly. Um, but in the summer of 1968, when I was 12, I'd certainly been allowed to go to the pictures on my own before then. But I remember it being the summer. I saw Bonnie and Clyde 14 times. I saw Once Upon a Time in the West 12 times.
Jesus.
And weirdly, and it shows this sort of halfway space you're in at that age between being a kid and being a young adult, as they call them now. Because there's Bonnie and Clyde and Once Upon a Time in the West. The other one I saw, I think, 10 times was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So, so I had a varied thing. And I'm tempted to include 2001 in there, except I know that wasn't released until 1969. But again, that was another one that I saw, God, I don't know, 17 times. Bonnie and Clyde was the funny one because it had actually been released, its first release was a couple of years before. And my mum, God bless her, had gone with me. It was an ex, but my mum had dressed my 12-year-old self up. No, I guess 11 when it first came out. And, snuck me into the movie to see Bonnie and Clyde. But then Bonnie and Clyde was reissued on a double bill with Bullet. This is very, in the weeds. I apologize.
No, no,
But
no,
this,
no, no.
this
This is
is
great.
how desperate movie buffs were.
Yeah.
I had to see Bonnie and Clyde as often as I could because I loved it. And so it was playing, you might remember the cinema, Frank. I think it was still there when you were a kid. It was the Alton Odeon, which became the Alton Classic, which was down on Alton Road a bit past Penny Lane. But they had a double bill of Bonnie and Clyde and Bullet. And the thing about those days was you didn't have reserved seating and you didn't have, they called it continuous performances, which meant that if you went in at 12 noon, you paid your 10 and 6 or whatever it was to get in. If you didn't make a nuisance of yourself, you could sit there all day. So this double bill was only playing for a week. So I decided I would see Bonnie and Clyde twice every day, which meant no offense to Steve McQueen or anybody else in Bullet, Robert Vaughn, I think, wasn't it? But I had to see Bullet 9 times so that I could see Bonnie and Clyde 18 times because I'd go in, watch Bonnie and Clyde, stay there, watch Bullet, stay there, watch Bonnie and Clyde again, and then go home. So I realized that wasn't quite the answer to the question you asked, though I think that does say something about the particularly cine tolerant mother I had.
Yeah.
That I'd come home each day. What did you do today? I went to the Alton Odeon and I saw Bonnie and Clyde twice again. And I literally did that 5 days in a row. Um, but, and then I think parents were, you can only really speak about your own experience unless you heard horror stories from your friends that you remember. But my experience was my when I say parents, I really mean my mum. My dad was a little older when I was born, and he was not an active presence in the
Yeah,
rearing of the children. I mean, he didn't leave the home or anything. They weren't divorced, but he was just he was a World War II guy. He was RAF bomber commander in World War II, and I think after the war, he just figured when work is finished, I go to the pub
hmm,
and have a few pints with me mates. So he would come home about 8:30, which was fine by the time I was 14. I was still up, but we didn't really see him that much when we were. Anyway,
yeah,
sidebar. So my mom was very cine tolerant, as I say, and very permissive. Go enjoy, go do your thing. And either I and my circle of friends were very lucky in having permissive and tolerant parents, or I just blanked the fact that the others didn't. But that seems to be true for most of my friends. That as long as you weren't, getting into actual trouble, they just had a sort of, let kids be kids, let teenagers be teenagers. And I think that was fairly typical. I heard stories, obviously, as we all do, every generation, whatever the circumstance. But for the most part, I think parents were. I shouldn't really make a generalization, Frank, should I? Because I'm obviously talking about what they would call in surveys. This would be anecdotal evidence,
yeah,
not empirical evidence.
yeah,
But yeah, my experience was nobody's parent. No, I was going to nobody's parents gave a shit, but I don't mean that they were, emotionally distant. Um, but I think they would, in the same way they let the 8-year-old take his or her bike and disappear for the day, I think they also let the 15-year-old go to the pub and get served if they could get away with it.
yeah,
Which, because I mean, that was another thing about tolerant adults. I don't know how, as I say, Frank, I was from Wavertree, and Church Road and the High Street in Wavertree is famous, again, a cliche, for literally having two pubs on every block. So you could do this whole pub crawl in just 3 blocks on Wavertree High Street. And there was my pub of choice at 14, I'm not kidding, was the Lamb, which I gather is no longer there, I'm sad to say. But God, what were their names? Frank and I can't remember the lady's name, but the publicans who ran it, they must have known damn well we were 14. I mean, I was tall for my age, but there was very little enforcement. And again, if you didn't get into actual trouble, if you paid politely for your pint and sat down. So yeah, I was drinking regularly from the age of 14 in the Lamb or the Cock and Bottle or the oh God, what was that on? Well, there was a whole bunch of them. So I feel it was a more permissive, tolerant, and I guess trusting society in terms of parent-child responsibilities and stuff than it appears to be now. And I also, having done my research, having read an article or two, I gather that parents of today think the world is a terribly dangerous place for their children, either young kids or teenagers. And statistically, that's not true at all. In fact, today's parents could be even more tolerant and
yeah,
unworried about their kids getting loose, but they're not. We were, in fact, in much more danger in the early 1970s, except we weren't because, most people aren't murderers or rapists. So, so I think I guess that's the difference. Sorry, very long-winded answer to your
no, no,
question.
no, 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 no.
It is a more careful and nervous world
Yeah, it
that we
is.
live in now. It
Yeah.
seems. Yeah.
It is. I wanted to ask you about going into pubs because I remember in about 1993, it was the first time I took my mum to a pub. Like, and
Yeah.
she came with my friends just to a local pub nearby.
Yeah.
And there were a group of us, and I think I did or somebody said, Pat, what would you like to drink? She said, I'll just have a half. And the girls in the group went, Pat, why are you having half? And she said, oh, I've never drank a pint in a pub. And they said, Pat, it's 1993. Have a pint, you know. And my mum said, you got to understand. My mum, she spent even though she's from a village, she was out in the cavern and all those places.
Yeah.
She was in the heart of Liverpool. That's her
Right.
city. Um, but she said, oh, I was very naive. And in those days, in those times, there were still plenty of pubs where women didn't go in at all. Um,
Right.
do you remember what it was like then? Like the gender dynamic in pubs?
Yeah, it's so funny the story you just told, Frank, because um, I'm glad to hear that people your age in 1993 were telling you have a pint, but it sounded unusual to me because yeah, girls drank halves. That
Yeah,
was completely normal when I was. I'm probably, as I say, I'm 50. I'm probably midway between you and your mum's age, probably closer to your mum's age actually.
yeah,
So I'm sure, if she was caverning in the 60s or something, she's a little older than I am, but it was probably the the same social situations that your mum grew up in, I did. And it hadn't occurred to me that that was a sexist or gender defined. It just seemed normal. Blokes got pints, girls got halves.
yeah.
Unless the girl was having a vodka and lime, because that was
Yeah,
the that was the oh shit, this date's got to be expensive.
yeah.
But yeah, it seemed entirely normal to me, and it didn't seem they've been made to drink halves because they're smaller and more defenseless than us big strong men. It just seemed, well, they were smaller. So
Yeah,
it just seemed entirely logical that the pint glass was for the bigger person and the half was for the
yeah.
other. And until you told me that story, that hadn't occurred to me. That it was like, oh, I guess girls drink pints now. And I'm not saying this for the opportunity for humor, but is that true? Because they don't really have pub culture over here. They have bars,
Yeah.
you know what it's like, but it's slightly different. But is it now the norm for girls to drink pints in pubs? Do they
Oh,
still have
yeah.
halves? I don't know.
No, 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 no.
Oh, they
Yeah,
don't.
no.
No, I mean, do the pubs? Does nobody order a
That's
half?
a really good question, actually. I can't remember seeing any, but I live in Poland, so when
Yeah,
I'm up,
right.
when I am over, I don't go very often, but if I do go with some friends to catch up, I can honestly say I never see any woman. Maybe I'm not paying attention, but I don't think I've ever seen
Yeah.
any woman today who's drinking a half. No, I don't think so. But
Oh,
that's a good
that's
question.
funny.
I actually now you've got me thinking now, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't think
Yeah.
so. No.
Well, viewers, write in. Send a postcard
Yeah,
to
yeah. We need to get to the
yeah.
bottom of this.
No, it's a serious, important sociological question.
What about
Um,
what about though what about young men and young men and young women sounds a bit pretentious, but
young men and
what
young women. Now, steady on, Frank.
but what I mean is what was it like to try
You
and
mean, were
meet
they having sex back in the 1970s, the ancient days of the
no,
1970s? Yes, Frank, we were. I'm
no, I
sorry
didn't
to
mean it
tell
like
you.
that.
Yeah.
No, I meant how easy was it then though to because if you look at Gen Z, like really young Gen Z, some of the ones
Do
that
you
I
say Gen Z, not Gen Z? Because obviously I say Gen Z because I live here in the States, but
it's do you know what it is? It's a Polish thing because American English has a bigger influence on
yeah,
them
of
culturally
course
than
it does.
British
Yeah,
English, yeah.
yeah, sure.
So all the English guys who are teaching here, the older ones, like older than me, they don't like that. Me,
Right.
I'm for all English, all English.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, well spotted, Peter. I've just realised I need to. I'm probably going to be burned alive tomorrow by the British contingent of TEFL speakers in this country. Um, Well, what I actually meant was though is that
Yeah.
a lot of the kids that I speak to, that I teach, they will actually tell you that it's much harder for them to date today and to like find someone and speak to someone that a lot of them say they're quite introverted. Like they will readily volunteer that information and say, "Oh, we're
Yeah,
quite shy and introverted." I know we can put a lot of that down to social media. Um,
sure.
but you could also make that generalization about older people using social media too much.
Right.
But in the days, because I've watched a lot, a lot of the comedies that I like from the past were
Yeah.
things like Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads. And I always find that it's almost more like a drama at times. It's so interesting to see the
Sure.
way that people behaved. And if you showed that to a Gen Z or Gen Z kid, they'd
Yeah.
probably say, "Whoa, it's terrible." And I'm like, well, actually, that's a very good representation of the humor of how people were in those days. I could show you something that really isn't
Oh
politically
yeah, there'd be some
correct.
sitcoms from the 60s. It's like if
Yeah,
you want to see racism, sexism, and
exactly.
homophobia, we
Yeah,
we can provide those
we
examples.
can, we can.
Yeah, sure.
But
But
I
no,
mean,
the Likely Lads was that was Dick Clement and Ian
it
LaFrennay,
was,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and it's not surprising that it's more like a drama because there was that period sort of from the mid 60s through to the mid 70s where you certainly had your deplorable racist, sexist, homophobic, crappy sitcoms. But you did have, your Johnny Spates and your
yeah,
Dick and Ian and a couple of other people who I should be able to sum it up, who were really doing, the term dramedy had not been invented
yeah,
then, but they would use the sitcom format, by which we really just mean 30 minutes and a situation each week of two fellas sharing a flat looking for women or whatever it is. But they'd use that again. I don't want to take the fun out of it by saying more seriously. But the Likely Lads and its revival, whatever happened to, and the Johnny Spade stuff, obviously that was they were taking the form more seriously,
yeah,
and yeah, and they managed to be both funny and charming and serious in intent,
yeah.
um, without putting people off. The God, I'm getting my ancient history of culture mixed up, but was it? I believe it was Sir Philip Sidney who said that art should be instruction by delight. I'm not even sure it ever needs to instruct, but for a guy in the 17th, 16th century, it's not a bad thing, is it? Because I think things like the good sitcoms, they do instruct by delight.
Yeah,
They the surface appeal is completely delightful. Like enjoy this, have fun, laugh, smile. It's charming and funny, but it might also tell you something about how life is lived, or maybe life should be lived. So I think those 60s and 70s sitcoms were true to the Sir Philip Sidney ethos of how art should work.
and we're back to the third part, and we've got with us Trevor Kennedy, just in case anybody's doing a double take. Thank you for
Yes,
being here, Trev. Thank you very much.
it's great to be here as always, Frank. And hello, Pete. Great to chat as always.
Always try. Great to see you, mate.
Thank you, mate. Yeah.
Right, I'd like to start this part by asking you, Peter, about the first time that you started to think about being involved creatively with any area of the arts. Could you tell me can you remember when, I don't
Sure.
know, you first put pen to paper or you picked up a guitar or any of those things?
Yeah. It's yeah, we talked a little bit about class structures earlier, didn't we? And
Yeah,
I think the interesting thing for me in retrospect, again, like all this stuff, very unconscious at the time, but in retrospect, I realized that as a blue collar kid in Liverpool, um, I assumed unconsciously that the arts were not for the likes of me.
Hmm.
Novelists, playwrights, movie makers, painters, whatever. They were, I don't think I assumed they were posh people, but I thought they were a different class of people. And the one exception to that, which makes perfect sense, especially coming from Liverpool, was music, was popular music, because being way older than you two fellas, I was a little kid in the Merseybeat boom. So literally every fucking street in Liverpool had pop acts living in them. There was a girl singer called Tiffany who lived. I was in number six, and Tiffany lived in number seven opposite, and she was signed by Brian Epstein.
Wow.
And she released a couple of records. I guess she didn't become famous, but it was clearly it was a normalized thing that people from literally a street like mine, because Tiffany lived opposite me, um, could get into music, and it didn't seem like that was the arts. It just seemed, well, it's kind of the equivalent of being a footballer or a boxer. You
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
it was a way for working class kids to do stuff. So the first conscious move I made towards that was, for as it is for so many people, especially in my generation, was to form a band, whether we could play or not. Um, I'll put a little footnote in there just to say, again, in retrospect, I realized long before that, when I was like 9, 10, or 11, I'd tried to make little hand-drawn comic books because I love comics. Um, and I remember, I remember talking to my mate Les Thompson into spending an afternoon trying to make a comic in the box room upstairs. And again, in retrospect, I realized Les was thinking, "What the fuck are we doing this for? I'd rather be riding bikes in a park."
Yeah.
But so I guess there had always been an unconscious urge in me to make shit. Um, and in fact, it would have been. Oh, and again, like a lot of us, encouraged by the right English teacher, I'd written a
Hmm.
couple of stories at school, at senior school. But the first sort of serious attempt to do something was form a band, and this would be 71, 72. So I'm still only 16, about to turn 17. And it was the little before your time, lads. It was the glorious epoch of glam rock.
Yeah.
So my holy trinity was David Bowie, T-Rex, and Roxy Music. And I mean, we were shite, we didn't sound anything like any of them, but we wanted to. And I did have black fingernail polish and one false eyelash. So that was very important. And actually, it was very easy in those days. I don't think it's as easy for young musicians now. But even though we were literally underage, apart from anything else, underage and not very good, we played pubs. We got gigs in the pubs in Liverpool, even though they couldn't legally serve us beer. Well, they did, of course. But so so technically, I was a this is ridiculous because we didn't think of ourselves that way then. We were literally still at school. But I was a professional musician by 1972 because technically we'd been paid 15 quid to do a couple of 30-minute sets. Um, and the interesting thing for me and for anybody who's stupid enough to be interested in me and my early associations, it was a direct consequence of being in that not very good band that I was later in a better band, but we'll talk about that at some point. But as a consequence of that, the kid who was again a couple of years younger even than me, Graham Bickley, who I'd bullied into joining the band, having fired the drummer. I got Graham to join the band because somebody told me he played the drums. So I accosted him in the school corridor and said, basically, you're in my band now. We're rehearsing tomorrow night. Um, and but we became pretty good friends, me and Graham. And he eventually said, "Oh, you should meet my sister's mate, Clive, because he's like you. He reads books." So an assignation was arranged, and this is all old news to Trev because I think I told him this for his interview for Phantasmagoria as well. But anyway, as a consequence of that, I met Clive, who was Graham's older sister's friend. We were at the Blue Coat. Sue Bickley, Graham's elder sister, was at Quarry Bank with Clive, and also Doug Bradley. So, so being in the band's name was Amanda Revel. There were no girls in the band, and there was certainly nobody called Amanda, but it seemed like a glam rock name to us. Um, so being in Amanda Revel was directly led to me being in what was eventually known as the Dog Company,
Yeah.
which was a live theatre company. Um, the alumni of which includes me, Clive Barker, and Doug Bradley. And I've said this before, so I'll try and make it quick, but I always want to acknowledge Clive particularly, because as we just said, I thought the routes to the arts were closed to oiks and yobs
Yeah.
like me. Um, and Clive was the first guy who just he was a little posher than me anyway, so he didn't feel it because he was from Mossley Hill. You know
Yeah.
what I mean, Frank?
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was from Mossley Hill, not Wavertree. So he was a little bit posher, and maybe the world felt a little more open to him. I don't know. But more importantly, his attitude was fuck that. We're going to do what we want to do. Nobody is stopping us from doing plays, movies, whatever. And I like to think having already formed the band at least, that I would eventually have had the drive to do the things people like us like to do. But I always want to acknowledge that Clive was a guy who like gave me the green light, said, yeah, we can do this. We can do anything we want. Um, I mean, he never spoke like that. He was way more pretentious, but that was that was essentially what he was saying. And so, as a consequence of that, my next entree, my true entree into the arts was the Dog Company, and I was with them for the next 7 or 8 years. Sorry, like
Okay. I'd like now, Peter, to talk to you about the dog company and everything that you were involved in that period. That's a fascinating story. So could you tell me about how it all started and how you got involved?
sure. It started a little bit before me. It was a bunch of people as I said earlier, I was at the Blue Coat School, and this was a bunch of people at Quarry Bank School, John Lennon's old alma mater. Um, they had the same headmaster, a guy called Pobjoy. So Doug and Clive were at Quarry Bank, along with Phil Rimmer, Lynn Donnell, and Julie Blake, who are the names I associate with the Dog Company. But there were a couple of people from the early days as well. Actually, Les Heseltine, who became known to the entire UK as Les Dennis, was a schoolmate of
Oh,
Clive's
yeah.
and Doug's. And uh, I met Les a couple of times, but he was no longer involved by the time I came on board. Um, and there was another guy called Malcolm Sharp, who was a very good actor. I'm not sure what happened to him. Ann Taylor, who'd been the lead in a little Super 8 movie they made the year before. But they were basically a bunch of school. Clive was a little older, and he had just graduated university when I met him. I was 18, he was 21. Um, and they they were how would I put it? They were in the process of deciding that they were going to try and make a go of this. And as I said earlier, having been introduced via the drummer in my pre Dog Company band. I came on board. Oh, it was one. And I've told these stories before, but that sort of instant click thing. Like Clive and I met. There's no phones. There's no internet. There's no whatever. You arrange to meet a friend of a friend, and we met in Allen Library, which I'm sure you've seen, Frank. Um, and we just connected immediately, partly because, which touches on some of the things we've all been talking about, the commonality of enjoying low culture, high culture. I was going to say everything in between, but not really everything in between. We didn't like middle culture. We didn't like middle brown, middle class culture, but we loved Carry On movies and T.S. Eliot. And we loved Batman and Samuel Beckett. Actually, Clive hated Samuel Beckett, but we could have engaged arguments about Samuel Beckett. Um, so that commonality of just liking the things we liked and really liking it and wanting to do it got me on board immediately. We went through a bunch of appallingly pretentious names before settling on that. When I joined, I think they'd already picked the name. They were the Theatre of the Imagination, which was bad enough. But then a year later, we became the Mute Pantomime Theatre because we'd gone down to London and seen the great Lindsay Kemp's productions of Our Lady of the Flowers and even better, Mr. Punch's pantomime. And so we should be a mime company. That was great. So we decided we'd be a mime company, even though none of us had any skills as mime artists whatsoever and no training at all. But so we were the Mute Pantomime Theatre. And then eventually a play that we had done as the Mute Pantomime Theatre, which was then called A Clown's Sodom, mutated into The Day of the Dog, and then eventually Dog. And we had to get rid of the name Mute Pantomime Theatre because now we were talking again. And my memory, I might be wrong about this, but my memory is that it was a throwaway in the room. One of us, maybe Dog, said, well, we could just name it after the play then, because we were going to do Dog next. So we were the Dog Company. But then whoever it was that said that, I think Clive and I then sparked to it because it was like, well, that actually sounds good. Whether or not there was a play called Dog, the Dog Company sounded sort of urban and agitprop and, avant-garde in a good way. So anyway, long story short, we became the Dog Company with that play, but we'd been that sort of core group of the people I mentioned earlier. Clive, Doug, me, Lynn, Phil, and Julie. Even when we had the the other names prior, and I'll get the factual stuff out the way first. We all moved to London eventually. I stayed with them through to 1980 before I went back to Liverpool to form the Chase. And in that time, we did various plays and productions of of a theatrical nature. And we made a couple more indie movies on 16mm. And we were talking about blagging before. We blagged the Merseyside Arts Council out of 600 quid to make The Forbidden, which meant we could make that one on 16mm, not just Super 8. But it was still silent. We only had a silent Bolex 16mm camera. So in the period I was with them, I think we did 5 plays. We never really finished The Forbidden. It was edited together 20 years later, by a guy from the South Bank show after Clive became famous. Um, but we did all that stuff. It was a great period for I think all of us. Um, or rather, it seems like a great period now because, like anything, you like time lets you just remember the good parts.
Yeah.
So, in fact, like any group of you know, only just post-adolescent people. There was internecine warfare and rivalries and jealousies and who was sleeping with who, and all this stuff was going on. But that's all sort of been washed away by the kind work of time over the years. And I just remember it as this great period of, you know, artistic ambition and will. Um, because we used we played to audiences that we outnumbered quite often, which I think a lot of fringe theatre people from the 70s and 80s can identify with that. But again, as with the music, there were venues you could play. I think it's probably much more difficult for young people trying to do that kind of thing now. Um, but it was a very exciting, creative time. We did everything ourselves, everything in house. Um, we made our own posters, and it was great. As a Marvel Comics fan, it was great because I got to be Joe Sinnott to Clive's Jack Kirby. I realize that's a niche reference, but the people who get it will know exactly what I'm talking about, which means we had no money, but we did have access to the printing department at Iron Marsh College because Julie was still at Iron Marsh College. So Clive would pencil a poster and I would ink and letter the poster. That's what I mean by Joe Sinnott, who was Jack Kirby's inker on the Fantastic Four. Nerd alert. Um, and then, so he'd pencil them, I'd ink and letter them, and then with Phil Rimmer's technical help, we'd make the squeegee boards to do silk screen presses, and we would hand pull 50 copies of these posters for the plays. I wish we'd kept them
Yeah.
because now, with Doug being famous as Pinhead and Clive being famous as Clive, they'd probably be worth money. Those hand pulled,
Yeah.
hand created by, oh, and we called ourselves Boxer Graphics, Clive and I, because we thought that made it sound. I've made this joke on Facebook before, so I apologize, but we called ourselves Boxer Graphics because it made it sound like there were professionals involved, but there were not. Um, so it was great. It was, I look back on it very, very fondly. And of course, it was great training for us all
Yeah.
in terms of, choosing to live the artistic life. It was also great training for Clive because he started writing the stories that would become the stories in the Books of Blood while we were doing Dog Company. And in fact, as I've said before, I make it as a joke, but it's true. Everybody reveres the Books of Blood now, but they started as a side hustle.
Hmm.
Um, Doug and I were literally the first people in the world to read those stories because Clive wrote them on the side and asked me and Doug if we'd read them to see if he had a chance of making money out of them. The plan being that he, being the starving playwright for our starving theatre company, if he could knock off a few crappy little horror stories, he could get an income stream going that could help underwrite the theatre company. Um, but it ended up not as a side hustle because they did quite well, and he went off to be he went off to be world famous. But also, the dog company continued for at least I think another 3 years after I left, after I'd gone back to Liverpool. They brought in some new talent, some actual trained actors like Oliver Parker and Mary Roscoe, both of whom I knew and were friendly with, and at least two or three other people who I apologize, I should have prepared. Um, but I can't remember the names of those people. But oh, actually, I think briefly Simon Bamford later
Mhm.
was in Dog Company. I knew he'd been in some of Clive's plays because he was part of the Cockpit Youth Theatre group, which Clive had been involved with. And I think I only realised a few years ago that Simon had in fact technically been a member of Dog Company 3.0 or whatever it would have been. But but that, sorry. So I went off on a bit of a ramble, but yeah, it was great. It was a small heart. It was a cult. We were a cult, really, in the sense that when you read descriptions of cults, that insular, hermetically sealed, us against the world. We were, yeah, it was borderline culty. In fact, it was so culty, for example, that when I left, I was still the guy who ran the auditions with Clive for my replacement. So I don't know, because it's like it was important that like the cult mindset was in there to pick my successors. So Ollie Parker went on to be the delivery man in both the first two Hellraiser movies. He's the guy who gets eaten by the mattress. But more importantly, he became a serious actor and a serious director. I say serious, but also directed a couple of the revived St. Trinian's movies.
Oh,
So nice one, Ollie. Um, and his brother Nat was Inspector Lindley in the Inspector Lindley mysteries. So there you go.
what about you?
Yeah.
You said that Clive Barker was writing at that time, but were you writing at all?
Um, no, I wanted it's we were at a workshop. Our approach was workshop theatre, um, which means that there was definitely creative input from, I mean, not just me, from all of us. Um, although I think, me and Doug were the mouthiest, so probably probably more input from me and Doug than the others. But no, Clive was the writer. Clive was the house playwright. But what would usually happen is Clive would, especially when we were a mime company, Clive would generate a text, and then we'd spend 6 months workshopping it and fucking with it and coming up with ideas. And it was very collective,
Hmm.
creative work. But I never want to give people the wrong impression that like if there was written work involved, it was 90% of the time it was Clive's. There were a couple of things later. Well, after my time, Ollie and Doug put a show together, which was basically a celebration of the life and work of William Blake. So it used a lot of Blake texts and they edited it together. I missed that one. So I can't really tell you what it was like because I was back in Liverpool and I didn't see that production. But it was called Dangerous World. But pretty much everything else was a Clive play, and it became more conventionally a playwright and the company who performed his plays than it had been in, say, 74 and 75, where it was a little more avant-garde, fringy, collective, everybody throw ideas in. But the handy phrase that pre-exists, of course, is artistic director. I would say there's no doubt that Clive was the artistic director of
Hmm.
Dog Company. And even when he wasn't officially the playwright, because we were doing strange mime works, he was it was his show.
But when did you though first actually start writing fiction?
Well, apart from the two stories I wrote for the English teachers that we talked about earlier, I know precisely and sadly why, Frank, because I'd left the dog company, I'd gone back to Liverpool, we formed a chase, we had that thrilling moment of our song being played on the radio by Janice Long. Um, and then I turned 30 and I had the sad realization of many a wannabe pop star, which was if you're already a pop star when you turn 30, you can stay a pop star, but nobody really gets to be a pop star at 30.
Yeah.
So I thought I would have to look around for other alternatives. So it was very, very consciously, well, there don't seem to be the same age limitations on writing.
Yeah.
So I'll try writing. I think like all of us and people that are interested, and every potential artist has similar stories. Um, but so I'd drawn a little, I'd painted a little. Obviously I'd written songs in the band. Um, but as soon as I started writing, I know it's a horrible cliche, but it felt like home almost immediately.
No, I was just really going to say, Pete, that I can certainly identify with what you're talking about, with the sort of growing up in a working class background, where getting into the arts was perhaps seen as something
Yeah,
that it was like a no-go area for working class kids. Certainly as a young working class lad growing up in the 80s in Belfast,
yeah.
sort of creative arts people were university educated and, those types. And like you say, it wasn't for us oiks. We were just expected to leave
Yeah,
school and get work in a factory or a shipyard or whatever. So yeah, I would definitely sort of identify with that and agree with that. Yeah.
yeah. I
That
think it's
actually,
been. Go ahead,
that
Frank.
Trevor's just reminded me of a question I wanted to ask you before,
Yeah.
which is, what was the work advice or careers advice at the end of school like?
Yeah. Um, well, it certainly wasn't. I tell you what, young Atkins, why don't you try to be a screenwriter and novelist? That was not on their list. I actually, you know what? I'm being a bit. I totally take your point, Frank, because yes, it was not assumed that certain esoteric paths were worth discussing. But I have to admit, I wasn't actively discouraged
Yeah,
or pointed in the wrong directions specifically by. Actually, that's partly because the Blue Coat was such a fucking antediluvian establishment. We didn't have career advisors.
yeah.
In fact, they were interested in getting us into university because
Oh, okay.
their rating in the Liverpool education system
Yeah,
was ranked on how many of their sixth formers went on to colleges. And I actually think that's true. I don't think there was career advice per se because they figured the ones we can steer into a university path. I'm making it sound, perhaps more cynical or conscious than it was, but everybody else, like the lads who were going to leave school at 16, it was like, well, good luck to you, find a job. Like you see, enjoy the factory floor kind of thing,
yeah, yeah,
as you were saying, Trev. Um, so I wasn't discouraged from what I was vaguely beginning to think I wanted to do, but I certainly wasn't actively encouraged either. And if I'd had conversations with the teachers, I think, when they're playing the odds, in a way, they're being well intentioned when they warn young people off trying to do the kind of stuff we like to do. Um, but yeah, I suspect they would have said the equivalent of the phrases we're all familiar with, like, well, that's all well and good, but
yeah.
it's good to have something to fall back on, isn't it? So perhaps, um, I mean, I was always,
I know a guy here who's a professional playwright from Belfast or just outside Belfast, who I'll not mention. But he told me that he went to a local secondary school, and his careers advisor at the time, this would have been around late 70s, sort of, he's about 10 years older than me. So maybe
yeah,
early 80s Belfast, his career advisor asked him what he would like to be when he left school. And he said he would like to be an actor. He ended up becoming a playwright. But apparently, this careers teacher said to him, first of all, get that shit out of your head. And I'm going to give you two addresses that will keep you right in future life. And one of them was for the dole, and the other one was for the local court. And apparently, that's a true story. So
That's great.
obviously, not all teachers or careers advisors were like that. I hope. I hope.
Yeah, right, right. And I mean that's hilarious, and we've all heard versions of that, and it is true. But the thing is, like I said in passing, and I've only just thought this now, in a way that they're just playing the odds for the kids' sake. I mean, I think get that shit out of your head is a bit direct, but but in some ways they probably are trying to save us from heartbreak.
Yeah.
So, so we shouldn't badmouth them as much as our instinct is to do that. But
Tough
that's a
love,
particularly
maybe
funny one.
maybe attempts at tough love
Yeah, right, right.
or not.
Yeah, exactly. That career advisor probably brags to his mates now and says, he's a playwright because, I gave him some tough love.
I
I
encourage them.
gave him something to react against. So I congratulate myself on his success. Probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did your band ever play any school concerts? Did you ever do anything like that?
Yeah, like I say, we actually ended up doing uh legit gigs in pubs. But yes, the very first thing we ever did was a school. Actually, it wasn't quite the same band. I was playing bass in whatever, a proto version of what became the other band. But yeah, we played a school dance, but it was all covers. We hadn't, because I know. Are you a musician as well, Trevor? I know Frank is.
Sorry, no, I'm not a musician, but I used to do radio. I've done radio for about 9 years, so I've played a lot of
Right.
music. But regarding playing instruments or singing, I have no talent whatsoever.
Well,
You know,
neither have I,
I
but
love music. I mean, yeah, but I did radio for 9 years or so. Yeah,
yeah,
before
right.
before they censored me and got rid of me. Well, that's another story.
You
The reason I was asking though is because one of the things I realized, and again, a lot of this is unconscious. So when you're that young, you don't really, I mean, some people do have very clear paths and instincts
yeah.
and plans. I never had a plan. Um, but I do realize in retrospect, that band that played the school dance, Frank, we would, I think we did like six covers, one of which was almost certainly Smoke on the Water, and one of which was almost certainly Can't Get Enough of Your Love by Bad Company or whatever. Um, and the guys, I'm trying to think if there's anybody in common in that, but like Graham wasn't in that band, and I don't think Ian was in that band. Um, but I knew unconsciously or consciously, I knew we should be right. If you wanted to, I wanted to write songs, not just do I love playing covers, don't get me wrong. It's always fun when somebody does cover songs. But I thought, well, this isn't going to get us on top of the pops, doing cover versions at school dances. So I guess I did unconsciously think it was better to write a shit song of your own than just play adequate cover versions of somebody else's better songs. Um, but yeah, we did play a couple of school dances in a couple of different incarnations. And yeah, we definitely did Smoke on the Water because I remember doing that bass entry. That famous riff begins, and then you got a nice walk in from the dum 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 comes in on measure four or whatever. And I remember feeling good in my black velvet jacket because the bass was cranked up, and this cute blonde girl in the front looked at me when the bass came in. And I thought, this is the life for me. So yeah.
How did
Rock and
you?
roll.
It is definitely rock and roll. It is.
It's rock and roll. Yeah.
We can only dream of such things. But how did you make the no not the leap, but how did you go from the music scene? Because you were in a band though, weren't you?
Yeah.
Did you release an album or something? I think you did.
Well, we released independently
Yeah, but it's still
produced
really yeah, it's
cassette
still
EPs,
yeah, yeah.
like a lot of people did. But that was post Dog Company. This
Oh,
band I'm
okay.
talking about really was like a high school band.
Yeah,
Like I say, we played a couple of pubs, but then once I was in Dog Company, I let that go. And when I left Dog Company in 1980, it was to move, we'd all moved to London by then. Um, and one of the various reasons I left in 1980 was to move back to Liverpool and form a proper band, um, which which I did, and that was a band called The Chase, and we we never got signed. We never did an official album, but we put out cassette EPs. We gigged. We were on local radio, and so I did have that thrill that you've seen it in movies or TV shows, where we were coming back from a gig. Frank will know what I mean, Trevor. We were coming back from over the water, coming back from a gig in New Brighton, I think, or Wallasey maybe. We used to play the Dale Inn a lot in Wallasey, and we were coming back, coming out of the tunnel from the Wirral to Liverpool, Trev, and we had the radio on as one does, and this riff started playing, and we all fell silent because something was odd. And a couple of us were packed in the back of the transit van, right? And the bass player's brother is driving. And we start saying, wait, what? And then the driver screams, it's us! It's us! We're on the fucking radio! And it was God bless her, the dear departed. It was Janice Long, who later became quite well known
yeah,
nationally.
yeah. I remember
She
Janis
hosted
Long.
Top of the Pops and stuff, but she
Yeah,
was a local DJ then
yeah,
on Radio Merseyside, and we dropped our cassette off at her, and so she was playing us on the Janice Long show, and I know this is going to sound like bullshit, but despite later having a novel published and having a movie made and all the other stuff, the thrill of hearing your band on the radio driving back from a gig, that's yeah, that's the apex of my artistic life. Just think, oh my, and
yeah,
hearing Sly's voice screaming, "It's us!" Was great. So no, so in real terms, no, the band didn't achieve anything, but we had a bit of a following. We did regular gigs, and we did have that thrill of fucking hell, we're on the radio. Yeah, it was. But that was the chase. That was post Dog Company. Sorry, I was a little distracted. Did that make sense?
yeah,
What I
yeah.
was
It did. Yeah,
okay. Yeah, then
yeah. But
we'll
how
pick
long?
up
How
where we left
how long was it before you were writing and then you were submitting it and then you got your first acceptance?
I again like for all of us, it feels forever before anything happens, of course.
Yeah.
In retrospect, I was pretty lucky. I know I'd been rejected by Twilight Zone magazine, quite
Mm.
rightly. I sent them a piece of shit. Um, I'd been rejected a couple of smaller, like real indie press magazines that I can't even remember the titles of. And and I think my first sale was to John Gilbert at Fear magazine,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
a name familiar to both of you guys, I'm sure.
Mm. Yeah.
And the story wasn't published until Hellbound was in production. But
I've got that. Trevor's got it as well.
I have that
issue
issue
number
here.
3,
Yeah.
great cover, Oliver Frey's cover
Yeah,
for
yeah.
that,
Yes.
Oliver
because
Yeah.
Frey. Yeah,
John
Oliver
held the
Frey just
story.
passed away a couple of years ago.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, it was very
Yeah.
sad
For
because
for Trevor and I though, that's our you know, when we ask, people like you about when you
You mean
first started.
old people?
No, no, no. I just meant, you've got the guys you remember who inspired you to
Famous
do it. But
monsters of filmland or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and
Oh no,
Trevor and I,
absolutely.
yeah, we had this conversation, and I had seen you before because of the Granada TV special they did. It was only in the Granada
Yeah.
region. Um, but yeah, I remember that. I can picture it all very clearly. And Fear always had the little author bit down the side of the page.
Yeah,
And I
right,
was like,
right.
oh, that's Peter Atkins. Yeah, well, look. Yeah, those are very exciting times when you're a teenager and you want to be a writer yourself and you're reading all that. It's all inspiring stuff, Trevor. You remember that, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. This essentially, Fear and all those types of publications, the Steve Jones publications and stuff from back
Yeah.
then, they were basically my education.
Sure.
Yeah,
As
yeah,
school could, I had absolutely no interest in things like, maths or science or whatever. These types of publications and this whole sort of scene that you guys were fronting,
yeah,
certainly in Britain at least,
yeah.
was very much my real education, and I'm
Well,
very proud of that.
that's fantastic. That's great.
Yeah,
Because yeah, exactly. I totally remember that. Half a generation or two generations earlier. Yeah, that thing of knowing there was a world out there that you wanted to be part of, and having this sort of monthly thing arriving that would reinforce it. And I mean, I wasn't joking before, Frank, when I said famous. I know Famous Monsters is actually a 1950s magazine, but
Yeah.
it ran right through the 60s. And yeah, that sense of there are other people in the world
Yeah,
that like this, it's not even really niche entertainment, is it? Especially horror movies. That's pretty broad mainstream thing. But there is that sense of, oh, there's a home here. There's people
hmm,
like me who,
well, it goes back to the cult analogy, but a happy cult. Well, for most of the time,
yeah, yeah, happy, yes,
not
yeah,
truly it,
good cult, yeah, yeah. No, well, that's
No
cool. I mean,
Jonestown
that's
massacre.
yeah, right. But that's lovely to hear. And it's funny now, I know I've gone on a bit this interview about being an older man, but but it is true. You do sort of you don't really get focused on things until you look back.
mm,
Because certainly again, as I think it was before you joined us, Trev, but we were talking about the well, actually, we didn't specifically talk about imposter syndrome. We were sort of talking about imposter syndrome socially, about not knowing how to talk to girls and things like that. But we've all got imposter syndrome, and although I guess I was 32, which is quite late to start in a way. By the time Hellbound came out, at least I was 32. But I was still just an innocent abroad and definitely felt imposter syndrome every day, all the time. And and it is only now looking back, because all my mates, because by now I was meeting generational like-minded people. Like you mentioned Steve, Trav, and there'd be Steve, there'd be Kim Newman, there'd be Neil Gaiman, there'd be well, Mike Marshall Smith's a bit younger than us, but there'd be all these people, and I look back now and realize, oh yeah, I guess we were. I mean, we were absolutely not a movement, but I see that there was a generational shift
yeah,
where we briefly
Yeah,
came into focus. There'd been a generation before us, there's a generation after us, and the wheel always turns. But I do see now, looking back, it was like, oh, I guess again, blagging. It looks like in retrospect, oh, we blagged them. It looked like we were the A team.
but
yeah,
but but I would argue that even as a kid, I would have looked upon you guys as a movement, and
yeah. I did. I did. Yeah,
even now, I would. I mean, say you guys would post old photos of conventions with Clive and yourselves and stuff.
Sure.
from
Yeah.
before my time. I would get like a little envious that, I wish I'd have been part of that, part of that scene back then,
Ah, the
and
good old days of black and white television, and
Yeah.
yeah, envious in a sort of a
in a
positive
good
way. I
way, in a
think,
way that made you want to do it, right?
yeah,
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 yeah, absolutely.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
for you though, because had you already finished Hellraiser 2 at that time?
By the time that it was still talking about Fear Number Three, where the story
Yeah.
was published, yes, I think when that issue came out, the movie hadn't been released, but it was ready to be released.
Yeah.
Because Oliver Frey's cover was, of course, Chinard and the chains and
Yeah.
whatever. It was great. Um, but I think it was still a couple of months away from release. I think it was 1988. Don't know. Oh yeah, it would have been. Yeah, because I've made jokes about this before, and I know we don't want to dwell too much on the Hellraiser period, but I will point out that Hellraiser 2, not content-wise, but Hellraiser 2 was a Christmas movie. New World thought the smart move was to release it on December 23rd, 1988. And actually, they weren't stupid. It did quite well.
Yeah.
So I remember when I heard they were released it on December 23rd, I thought, what the fuck? This this is ridiculous.
It's
Um,
it's my favorite Christmas movie,
there you go. God bless you, Trent.
and it captures the
Um,
spirit of the season totally.
yeah, exactly. God, I wish we'd put one Christmas ornament in it somewhere so it could qualify actually as a Christmas movie. That'd be great. But long story short, what that means is because that was the US release and then the UK release was, I think, 3 or 4 months later, it means that that issue of Thea was a good maybe even 5 or 6 months before the movie came out in the UK, at least, because Thea was a UK magazine, as we know. So, yeah, technically that. And then just to wrap up quickly, your question, Frank. So, I'd started writing at 30, in that panic of I'm not going to be a pop star. I'd started writing, I'd written 3 or 4 stories, and as you do, you send them to your mates. And Clive had become established 2 or 3 years previously with the Books of Blood. So I sent him these 4 stories and said, hey, I'm trying to do it. What do you think? And he was great and very encouraging and kind, but also specifically, he said, "Oh, this is good timing. I'm going to show them to my producing partner, Chris Figg," which is how I got into the whole Hellraiser thing. That was the story you remembered, Frank, about how we blagged the producer. But we don't need to get into that now. But I had this little lucky. I'm obviously unlucky. We're all lucky when we get to do the things we want to do. Um, but it wasn't even necessarily so much luck as it was just that sort of bizarre speed thing that happens when you're young and the various irons in the fire suddenly take. So I had, so technically I was in print as a short story writer before the movie came out, but obviously, nobody noticed that story. But I made a couple more sales and um, I got interest from a lit agent. Um, I'm not naive enough not to assume that it helped that I had a movie coming out.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
as we all know, it's really hard to get a bloody agent to look at you. Um, and although she was clever enough not to say, well, it helps that you've got a movie coming out, I think clearly it probably did. So I'm not pretending it was the high quality of what I showed her that got me an agent. But um, but rightly or wrongly, she took me on. And so, so in fairly rapid succession, I had a story published, a movie come out, another movie go into production, and then the first novel, Morning Star, came out. Actually, not till 92. So that's a bit more of a stretch of time. But I'd written it and sold it by whatever it would have been. So it all just suddenly started rolling. And I'm very aware of, how lucky I was to be in the right place at the right time with the right colleagues and right friends. But but yeah, at that point it was like it was like, uh, well, fuck the day job. There's and actually that's why I always feel spoiled and lucky. I never had a day job. I had a day job for 6 weeks. I worked in the Liver buildings, Frank. Um, I worked for 6 weeks to pay off my AC30, which is a guitar amp, Trev. And so I took a job because I had to pay off the AC30 that, get this, I bought from a swinging blue jean. Now, anybody under the age of 60 listening won't know what the hell I'm talking about. But one of the other Merseybeat bands, along with the Beatles, who had a couple of hits, were called the Swinging Blue Jeans. There was a bunch of Liverpool bands, the Searchers, the Merseybeats, the Remo Four were an instrumental band who were once described by Paul McCartney as his favourite Liverpool band. And the bass player of the Remo Four was the dad of the other guitar player in the second incarnation of the Chase. So because Don Andrew, who was from the Remo Four, had been part of the Merseybeat scene, when I needed a new amp, he said, "Oh, me mate's selling one." And it turned out to be a member of the Swinging Blue Jeans. So I bought the very amp that had played whatever they had a hit with. It was a cover of Good Golly Miss Molly or something. Um, so I did work in the Liver buildings for 6 weeks to pay off the amp. But other than that, I am a spoiled bastard, and I'm very aware of how lucky I was that I never really had to have the day job. And I also hasten to add that is not because of any virtues I might or might not have as a writer of prose fiction, even though that's clearly what I've done more of over the long decades since what we've been talking about. But the only reason I never had to have a day job was the screenwriting gigs.
Mhm.
Because although, we all know there are some A-list writers who can make a living full-time as a writer simply based on books, I am not one of them. I'm not prolific enough, probably not good enough. But I would not have made a living as a writer without the screenwriting gigs, even though it was really a sort of pretty condensed period. I was an active screenwriter from 87 to 96, 97. And then, I did a few more of these that weren't produced, but, one of the advantages of working in Hollywood is you get paid for the scripts even if they don't make the movie. But so it was actually, in retrospect, a kind of condensed period, but it's what allowed me to make my living as a writer was the screenwriting work, because you know no matter how bad the movies are, the money is better. They pay you
Yeah,
more for the
yeah.
most part. That's not true if you're Stephen King or Richard Osman, but for the most part, they pay you more to write screenplays. So I'm very aware of the luck involved.
Okay, so we're into the final stretch now, Peter, and I'd like to concentrate on asking you about the actual author side of your career rather than the screenwriting side. I know those two might go hand in hand, so I don't mean it's off limits or anything, but we want to keep most of that for the Hellraiser special podcast that we're going to do. But can we go back to your influences in terms of when you first started writing prose, when you started writing fiction?
Yeah.
Did Were you particularly inspired by any writers you'd read when you were younger?
Oh, sure. I mean, like all of us, the short answer is everybody, Frank.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because I never know. It's always hard, at least for me at this end. Maybe a critical analysis of the work could point more accurate fingers. But it's very difficult for me to distinguish between my favorites, the people I loved most, and whether the and if those or other authors are more actually influential.
Yeah,
Because I don't, I yeah, I can certainly say I don't consciously attempt to imitate any of the people I like. Well, that's probably a lie. I don't try to consciously imitate the prose style, the sentence structure, or anything
yeah.
like that. But um, you kind of threw me with this one, Frank. Let me put my thoughts in order.
No,
I think
actually,
what it is,
you've made me think of something because there's a bit,
yeah,
no, not a bit. There's quite a lot of humor in your stories, in your short
sure.
stories. And I mean, obviously, you don't just read. I know some people do just read horror, and some people
Yeah.
don't. Which one are you? Do you read like as widely as possible, or
Oh,
does the
as
humor?
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, okay,
absolutely as widely as possible. And yeah, and I think that the humor, I was going to say what, what I was getting myself finally organized to say was I think while not consciously attempting to imitate the style or the sentence structure, the I'm very much a voice reader,
yeah,
a voice enthusiast, and I do think I'm probably a voice writer. In other words, the ideas might suck and the structure might suck, but I can probably charm the reader with the narrator's voice because again, let's assume favorites and influences actually are kind of the same thing no matter what level
yeah,
the influence is completely obvious. But the big voice writers for me who I loved as a 12-year-old, which is about the age you start to notice things like style and voice. Before that, it's just I like the story. When I was reading like Tarzan and James Bond or Biggles or whatever when I was 8, 9, or 10, that stuff didn't matter as much to me. But once I read people like, I'm trying to keep it chronological, people like Raymond Chandler and P.G. Wodehouse,
hmm
both of whom are masters of voice writing. Chandler famously didn't know who killed the chauffeur in The Big Sleep when Howard Hawks cabled him and said, "Who killed the chauffeur? They found the thing." And Chandler didn't know. No idea. He's actually quite a good plotter. I don't want to offend the Chandler fans out there, but you don't really read him for the plot. You read him for Marlowe's voice,
yeah,
and you don't read the Wooster and Jeeves novels for the plot. Although, again, Woodhouse is a great farceur, Farceur, for anybody out there. So he has a mastery of a kind of three-act, almost stage-like structure for his plots. But again, nobody gives a shit about, which debutante is Bertie going to fail to impress and how is Jeeves going to get his arse out the fire. It's the voice of Bertie. Not to get too lost in the weeds, there's a couple of stories where Jeeves is the narrator instead of Bertie, and they're just not as good. Um, so you want the, I know there's big debates nowadays about using first person because there's some morons out there who think it's a
yeah.
sin, which is insane because there goes David Copperfield or The Great Gatsby. So I don't necessarily mean it has to be first person, though the two examples I'm giving there, Chandler and Woodhouse, both of whom went to the same prep school, by the way, which is
Did they?
interesting. Yeah, um, along with Boris Karloff's elder brother. Yeah,
There
there
you
you go.
go. Yeah.
That one up, trivia fans. In fact,
Yeah.
Kim wrote a novel. Kim's prolific. So it was his last but one novel. The title was Something More Than Night, which is a Chandler quote. And it's not Chandler and Woodhouse, but it's Chandler and Boris Karloff
hmm
are the joint protagonists of it. But yeah, so and both of those guys, obviously Woodhouse overtly is humorous, is a comic writer. Chandler is not, is never filed as a comic writer, but Marlowe's voice is not, it's certainly not merely comic, but it has a laconic, wry, humorous, dark humor. Yeah, now I'll get all the noir fanatics up my arse for suggesting Raymond Chandler's funny, but he is funny. So I would say, very long-winded answer to your question, Frank. I'm sorry, but I would say the voice. Another example would be Archie Goodwin's voice in Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe novels. Though I didn't read them until much later in life. Didn't read them as a kid like I'd read Chandler and Woodhouse. Um, Also later in life, Elmore Leonard.
Hmm.
I don't think any of Elmore Leonard's novels are in first person, but again, they have the voice just drives you along, just pulls you through. You want to be in the company of these people. So anyway, I hope to try to do that with my stuff. There's plenty of other people I love and revere, but I don't like my favorite writer in our genre is um, of the old masters. It's probably Arthur Machen for me more than Blackwood
Yeah.
or M.R. James. Um, but Machen has a very, a beautiful heightened prose style that I don't try to imitate. Although I do try to, if anything, he might be influential in the atmospheres I would like to claim I try to create. I would say might be Machenian, if that is indeed an
Hmm.
adjective, um, because he has, well, he and Blackwood, of course, they both have this sense of the numinous, and they're not quite there, the thinning of the veil between our world and whatever else might be out there. So, yeah, from our genre, I'd say it's those guys. So late 19th, early 20th century, mainly British fantasists. Mackem was Welsh, obviously. Um, so, yeah, anything and everything I've ever read. And I can't pretend that I wasn't also reading comic books and watching horror movies, which,
Yeah.
equally as influential. I remember when Stanley died, I tweeted an RIP Maestro, as everybody should. And I said without thinking, died today, the most culturally influential writer of the 20th century, which some people said, what the fuck, Stanley? But if you think about Stan Lee's massive, massive consequences of what he and Jack Kirby did, I think I'll stand by that tweet and say Stan Lee was the most culturally influential writer of the 20th century and a big influence on me. Other comic
Yeah.
book writers too, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Was
Compete
It wasn't it? I'm
your
so
style.
sorry. Sorry,
Oh,
Trev. Yeah.
you're right. It's all good. Yeah, your style of quirky dialogue, within prose and sort of snappy, quite at times humorous dialogue. Do you think that maybe comes from or is maybe backed up by your background as a screen and playwright?
Um, yeah, quite possibly, Frank. Yeah. I thought for a minute you were going to say, given Frank and I are both from Liverpool and you're a genuine Irishman, we're both ethnically Irish, the two. I thought you were going to lay claim to the usual, it's the Irish in you, which I also think it might be for sure,
Yep.
because you know the Irish blood does like to tell stories and make other people laugh.
Yeah.
So, but what did you actually say? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I will say. It's an odd thing that the two hat thing, because there are plenty of first-rate novelists or first-rate short story writers who are just not good screenwriters, and there are even more first-rate screenwriters who are not good novelists or short story writers because they do have their differences. But I think increasingly, generation by generation, there are people who can wear both hats. For
Yeah.
people who grew up watching movies, reading books, reading comic books, all the same. you kind of know instinctively, I think, how to approach each one. But I will say, I definitely learned from screenwriting. I've said this before on podcasts, so I'm not trying to like patent the phrase or anything. But precision, clarity, economy, like you can't waste space, and you've got to. I don't think my instinct was ever to be pretentious or long-winded in prose, but it might have been. I think there might have been enough of the what writing is supposed to sound like snob in me that I might have fallen into that trap. And screenwriting helped me learn a very important lesson for, I think, any artist in any medium, that the audience does not owe you their attention. You've got to get their attention and hold their attention and keep their attention. They don't owe you shit. If you don't grab their interest in the first page, they should throw your book across the room. It's but screenwriting, because it is about brevity to some extent and precision and as you say, sort of snappiness maybe. Um, and yeah, I think it definitely helped me. I'd written a couple of short. I think I'd sold one short story, written a few more, and I'd written a novella, which is what got me the gig for writing Hellraiser 2. Um, and when I came back to prose fiction after making it sound like there was a lifetime of experience, but it wasn't. After I'd written one screenplay, that was enough to tell you keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it
Yeah.
moving. So yeah, I do think, and having been in the theatre company too as well, Trev, like you said,
Yeah, writing plays. Yeah.
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 So yeah, definitely, they all feed each other. I think I am aware of the reader. I am like like I say, the audience doesn't owe you their attention. Very conscious of that. So I want to keep them interested. And I guess I do kind of concretize that metaphor into assuming there's a person who likes the kind of shit I do, and am I doing it right for them? But the reason I say I'm somewhere between you is I think just like the third act reveal of very bad thriller movies, I think the constant reader is me.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
think I I think I am writing for what I'd like to read
Yeah.
if somebody else wasn't writing it, kind
Yeah.
of thing. So I'm aware of those what I regard as virtues that I mentioned earlier, that keep it tight, keep it moving, keep it amusing. Small A, not necessarily funny, but um entertain. It's all of us, it's like, you got the spectrum of artist, entertainer,
Yeah.
and I like to wear both hats as often as I can. And yeah, I think my constant reader is a theoretical person I'm aware of, but I think constant reader has very similar tastes to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But
I
what?
think that's about trusting your own judgment as well, because you're obviously
Right.
well read and stuff. And yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a positive thing for sure.
What? What?
Yeah.
What about with when it's an invite to an anthology?
Oh yeah.
Does it change for you?
Not. I mean, obviously, if it's a themed anthology, I tend to be I'm sure you guys are too. I'm very cautious of the overly themed anthology invite. If it's specifically crab monsters in Birmingham on Easter
Yeah.
Sunday anthology, then it's like, I'm not sure I could add anything more than the other 11 contributors are going to do. But first of all, I'm never invited to enough anthologies anyway to really have that problem. Um, but I nearly always say yes. Um, and I don't usually find I actually find that stuff I don't want to say triggering because that's a loaded word these days, isn't it? But a useful trigger. You know, I think we spoke, didn't we, in one of the previous segments about the bit of grit in the oyster that
Yeah,
yeah, Cretan makes the pearl. You know, you need something. You need a starter. You need a flint to strike, and sometimes just the well, sometimes, let's be honest, lads, the very fact that somebody's been kind enough to invite you is is inspiration enough to make you want to do it. But you know, the theme is something you might not yourself have thought of. So
yeah,
yeah, it is a way in. But I don't, but I think the real point of your question, Frank, is I don't, and no editor has ever asked me to, and I don't think any worthwhile editor would. Nobody's ever asked me to tailor my style
yeah,
to a theme. You know, obviously, you know, make the subject matter relevant to the theme of the anthology. The stupidest one I ever did was when Conrad Williams was kind enough to invite me. This is about 14 years ago. Kind enough to invite me into Gutshot, which he explained was a Western anthology, and and I thought, oh, writing a Western story, all right. And of course, if I'd stopped for 1 minute to think about Conrad's track record and my track record, I would have realized that what Con was actually asking for was something for a weird Western anthology,
yeah.
which is, as you guys know, a little subgenre of its own. But I just figured he wanted a Western story, so I didn't write a weird Western. But I'm weird enough that right at the end of that story, well, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who might read it in the future, so I won't name it. But a little bit of the weird crept in almost accidentally, certainly not consciously. Um, so it was, and then when I submitted it, it finally occurred to me, and the cover letter sent with the thing to Con was, "Did you mean Weird Western? Because I just wrote a Western." And then I said, "But I think I've snuck so." And he said, "Yeah, of course I meant Weird Western, you fucking idiot." But he was he liked the story and he was kind enough to take it anyway. But I th well, that's not really an example of the theme hampering me in any way. That's just an example of me being stupid and not listening. But yeah, I think most theme anthologies, the downside of them is that you do get 11 stories about the same kind of thing. But if it's open enough that you can put it's also, I mean, let's be honest, it's kind of a challenge, isn't it? Because you say, well, what spin can I put on this so that it isn't another, zombie with a hatchet story?
Yeah.
Although nothing wrong with zombies with hatchet stories. But yeah, I don't know. I think most editors want you to remain you and do your thing in the context of this overarching concept they've come up with. I mean, certainly that's true. Like I've had stories. I was looking at stories in all three of Steve Jones's zombie apocalypse books, and well, actually, not all three. Two and a half of his Lovecraft Squad books. Um, There was a point to that rather than me just bragging about how often I was in Steve's books. But there was, oh yeah, because Steve is a smart editor, good and great editor, and he knows how much rope to give you, not to hang yourself, but to let you to
Yeah.
let you bring it in. And anybody who's read those books of Steve knows that
I've
there
read them.
is an overarching, not just a theme actually, especially in the Lovecraft Squad ones. There's because Steve likes to call those particular ones mosaic novels rather than anthologies. So there's a through line plot actually, which several of the contributors, including me, kind of ignore and just do little one-offs that take place within the timeline. But yeah, no, it's I Is it nicer to be invited to a theme anthology or a non-theme anthology? I don't know. Uh, I get because, as I say, I think especially for a procrastinator and a slowpoke like me, I think in a way a themed anthology does give you a little jump start. Oh, what
Yeah.
could I do with that kind of thing?
And
Somebody's actually giving you something to play with rather than just saying, "Do you want to play?"
okay, so we're actually into the final part, which is the sixth part of the podcast so far, because it's been such a fascinating chat. So I still want to continue with the questions about your writing career, not the screenwriting, but as an
Yeah.
author of fiction and prose. I wanted to ask you a question though about writing itself. Are
Yeah.
you a well-organized writer? Do you have a word count? Are you a planner? Are you a pantser? What are you? Which one are you?
Definitely a pantser. All my habits are bad. All my habits are bad. And the only comfort I can give myself is the advice I give other writers who are nervous about their work habits, which is whatever lets you do the work.
Yeah,
That's the right. There's no rules. There's no right way other than your way.
yeah,
And if some people some people write 50-page treatments before they'll write a novel, um, which the thought of it brings me out in hives.
yeah,
But that's for me. If that helps them write the novel, fantastic, do that. Um, I'm terrible. I'm a terribly disorganized, useless, procrastinating writer, like 90% of us. Um, and the only time I know we're talking mainly about the prose fiction, but you know what? I've always done both. So the only time I was really organized was the first time I was hired to do a screenplay by the producer Chris Figg at Clive's urging. And I was coming off, I'd been on the dole. And suddenly this posh guy from London was putting me up in a London hotel and paying me to write a screenplay. So I thought, well, the least I can do is treat this like a job. So for a 3 week period, I wrote from 10 till 1 every morning, had a 2 hour lunch break, treat myself, and then I would write for 3 hours from 3 till 6. Because I figured if I, because Chris had said to me, "Can you get me a draft in 3 weeks?" And I had, of course, replied, "Oh, yeah, no problem." And then did the math, like how many pages is that, blah, blah, blah. So I realized if I could generate 4 pages in the morning and 4 pages in the afternoon, then I could hand it in well within the 3 week deadline. And so for the only time in my miserable life, I did precisely that. Wrote 3 hours, had a nice long lunch break, wrote 4 pages, had a nice long lunch break, wrote 4 pages, took the evening off.
yeah.
And I did that for 3 weeks, very proudly handed in the draft, and I've never been that organized since. So I'm definitely a pantser. I think we talked about this a little, or maybe it was when the recording wasn't on, Frank. Um, I like to have something. I don't just literally open a blank file and see where the muse takes me. I need a trigger, either an end, either a nice phrase that can spark me off to start, or I need to know where it's going. I need to know, to borrow comedy parlance, I need to know what the punchline is if I'm going to set about the setup. But not since I'm lying a little bit. When my first novel, I did, I made notes ahead of time. I wouldn't say I really wrote a treatment or an outline, but I did prepare a little bit, I think.
Hmm.
And with my second novel, which was from 1997, I think I did the same. But I've never done, well, why would you with a short story anyway? But generally speaking, no, I just sort of sweat it. I just think I let the panic of being late for the deadline be
The
the thing that,
buzz.
yeah, yeah. And oh, but if we're talking about writing habits, I'll tell you the one thing I am, which in a way is not a pantser. Like you mentioned Ramsey earlier, and I know Ramsey famously doesn't regard the first draft really as anything other
Yeah.
than the block of marble from which he will then chip out the novel. And I get anxiety attacks if I have, and I'm not suggesting for a second that Ramsey's first draft wouldn't be, in fact, perfect. Let's assume it is. Ramsey just doesn't know it is. But I find it very difficult to move on to the next paragraph, never mind the next page, if I'm not happy with the paragraph. So
Ah, so
I don't really,
yours is the Kurt Vonnegut way.
well,
Kurt Vonnegut,
that's
yeah,
excellent company, but I didn't know
yeah,
that.
yeah. He never he Page. It can't move forward unless he
Yeah.
feels that
Yeah.
everything is perfect on it. Then he can move on to the next.
Yeah, I'm very much like that. And I think I don't know, although given Kurt Vonnegut's sort of sense of dark humor, he might have felt the same way. My fear is whatever dropped dead after that piece of shit paragraph, I can't leave that there.
Yeah,
We found this in his typewriter, Your Honor.
yeah,
Let's remove his name from the writer's catalog because this guy's shite. Um, yeah, it's just what if they find it and it's bad?
yeah,
It's like as you can tell, I don't really give a shit what I look like these days. But when I was a young dandy, it was like you don't want to leave the house to go clubbing if the hair isn't perfect
yeah,
like a werewolf of London. Jacket's got to be right, shoes got to be right. It's a little like that. You want the
yeah,
so in that sense, my first drafts are actually third or fourth drafts,
yeah,
but I redraft as I go. So
yeah,
that is an odd habit. I'm actually kind of chuffed to know that Kurt Vonnegut works that way
yeah,
because he's a real writer. So whenever you hear somebody else does something, you think, oh, thank God,
yeah.
I'm doing it right. But as I say, Ramsey, quite the opposite. I'm not putting words in his mouth. He sort of spews out the first draft and then
In longhand as well.
regards the work
Yeah, I
as
was just about to say that. Yeah, in longhand. Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah, indecipherable fucking longhand.
Yeah, I know. I've tried reading it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's phenomenal. His
yeah.
notebooks are yeah.
Do you?
I'm sure
So
I'm sure they go into.
are you straight into the computer when you're writing?
I am yeah
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
In fact, I mean I don't know about you guys. I other than signing my name, I can't do joint up writing anymore. Anyway, I'm terrible. Like
I keep the only sort of writing as such, longhand writing that I would
yeah
do would be I have to have my weeks organized, every day. So I keep a physical diary, not a dear diary. Today I
yeah,
went
but
to the shop,
just
but
yes
more to organize my week and the days. So that's really, I think, the only real longhand writing I do these
yeah
days,
right
unless it's something random or whatever. Yeah.
sure.
I've
But is
got
it?
I've got
Look at him.
always notepads, but the fact is, I'm very similar to you, Pete. I straight into the computer. They're not stories. They're just filled with ideas. Some of which
Yeah.
Right,
I haven't got a
right.
clue what they mean. I'm like,
Oh yeah, I'll scribble
"What?"
down a note. I mean, I'm not as organized to have notebooks, but like a bunch of post-its or something. I'll
Yeah,
write a
also, yeah,
thought or a line,
yeah,
but but not in cursive.
yeah,
I cannot do cursive anymore. I've
yeah,
got like muscle memory for my signature. Like if I'm writing a check, I can do the signature, but you know, it's just like.
Yeah,
that
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
block. And the arthritis doesn't help, so it's
No,
like I
no.
can't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I write on the computer. I do not write on paper anymore at all. Um, I'm so old that I started on a manual typewriter.
Me
Hellbound,
too.
Hellraiser 2 was written on a manual typewriter.
Yeah.
Um,
Smith Corona was my first. My mum bought me one. Bought me a Smith Corona typewriter
yeah,
as a
well,
kid.
that's a classic. It's a
Yeah.
classic brand. I think mine was a Corona, which is less expensive.
Yeah.
It was my girlfriend. She like lent it to me. I didn't even have a typewriter, but I'm trying to think now. I think I wrote the first novel on a typewriter. That can't be right. Good God.
Probably
Pe-
did, because word
People used to
processors. I don't know
submit
if you ever,
physical manuscripts to their publishers. It's
did
a
you have a
lost
word did you
world.
have a did you have a word processor? Because I remember when they started to become
I
popular,
did.
because even Stephen King wrote that very famous short story. What was it about? Word processors of the gods, and
Oh
that's when
yeah,
I
right.
yeah, that's when I realized, yeah, all the writers must be using. I didn't have one, but they were all using them. Did you have a word processor?
I think I either had a word processor or I had very first generation Amstrad 64 or something.
Oh yeah, yeah,
The big floppy disks, black screen, green letters.
yeah,
I don't think I think I went straight from I went manual typewriter, electronic typewriter, computer. I don't think I had a dedicated word processor in between, but it was that was the Wild West. That was a weird little
yeah,
6 year period where
yeah. It was, yeah,
everything settled into. But
yeah,
yeah, I've and again, no rules, no recommendations. Whatever lets you generate the work, that's the right thing to do. And for whatever psychological or even physical reason, um, it feels it feels official to me or feels real to me if I'm typing and watching the words appear on a screen.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I met a guy when I was working at a summer language camp, and we were on the Thames with about, I don't know, 80, 90 kids from different countries.
Yeah.
And someone said, "Oh, Frank, this new teacher here, he writes as well like you." I said, "Oh, all right, yeah, cool." He said, "Yeah, I only use a typewriter." I said, "You use a typewriter?" He said, "Yeah, because I feel like it's the authentic way of doing things." I nearly did push him into the Thames, but I resisted at the last moment. I'm like,
Where was this recently? Was this in recent
no,
years
this
or?
this was this was about 15 years ago,
Yeah.
Right.
15 years ago. But it was the
Oh
authentic.
yeah, right.
He was
No,
a real writer.
Yeah,
at
yeah,
that
yeah,
stage
yeah,
it was
yeah, yeah.
at
That's
that
happened.
stage it was pretension. The only excuse me, fellas, I'm just going to drop a name here. Ding.
Yeah,
As Harlan Ellison explained to me, um, Harlan was a typewriter guy, and when he saw the revolution coming, he panicked because he thought, what if they stopped making typewriters? So he bought 15 of his. I think what was your one? You know what? I
Smith
don't know.
Corona. Smith
There are
Corona.
plenty of Harlan fans out there who correct me if I got it wrong. So I can't
Yeah,
remember what model it was, but he took me to his closet and he opened the closet and there were 15 of these things. He went out. This would be, I guess, in the late 90s. It was a little later than that when he was showing them to me, but I guess his panic shopping spree was in the late 90s. And as I'm sure you guys know from the stories you've heard, Harlan was very performative. So
Yeah.
to some extent, the I'm getting 15 typewriters and I'll only work on a typewriter was a little performative, but it was also true. But unlike the arsehole on your boat, Frank, Harlan was of an age where I believed him. That was true, that he thought all my life this is the tool I've used, and if they stop me from using this, who knows if the muse might disappear.
yeah,
So although, you know, as I say, very much a performative personality. I also believe that was legit. For him, it was the only authentic way to write, in the sense that that was the authentic way to get Harlan
Yeah,
Ellison out onto the page.
he had been
Well,
doing it
if
for so
it,
long.
well,
Yeah,
look, if
exactly. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, if it had been Harlan Ellison on the boat who'd said that to me, there would be a completely different story there. I would be telling. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
pushing anyone into
Right.
systems, you know.
Right.
I'd be like, well, it's Harlan Ellison, you
So he
know.
can say it. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
he can do what he wants as long as he keeps doing what he's doing. That you know,
Yeah.
but yeah, watch it. The guy who I'm talking about, he's probably now some sort of
He's tuned in.
literary
He'll be
heavyweight.
watching
Someone,
this.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thinking Frank
It,
Duffy's a massive wanker,
yeah.
even though he's 34 on the Amazon digital charts with his short story collection. I'll edit that
Yeah. How
out. Don't
dare he? Yeah. Right.
edit that out. Edit that out.
No, yeah,
Um,
it's yeah. No offense to that guy, but anybody who uses the word authentic in that context, in
yeah,
the
yeah,
this is the right way to do it. I mean, that's what we've been talking about, isn't it? There's no right way to prepare. There's no right tools to use. Whatever, because it's hard. You know,
yeah.
people unless you're just a magician of prolificness like Stephen King or Agatha Christie used to be. Um, it's it's can be joyful, but it's not easy. So anything that gets you in the place where you can generate the stuff, then it's good.
Yeah.
Can I ask you some questions about your the books? And I know these are
Yeah.
the questions that some authors hate answering, but do you have any of all your books or short stories and novellas and novels, is there anything that you love more than any of the others? That if people
Mm.
want to know, imagine someone doesn't know who you are and they go, oh, what of yours could I read first? What would you recommend to them? What would be the first book that would come to straight away you'd say, well, this.
Yeah.
The gateway drug,
Say it again, Trev.
the gateway drug to Pete
Oh, the
Atkins.
gateway drug. Yeah, right, right, exactly. The thing is, like all of us, so defensive and anxious that it wouldn't be a gateway drug. It would be like, no, what can I possibly give them that they might like? So whether it's the hardest drug, the softest drug, it's like give them that one. Um, I think what I would probably say, because also it's kind of used to use the word all, Frank, because I am not prolific. It's like I've got three novels and technically three collections out there, and a couple of published screenplays and stuff. I think the ones partly because it's the more recent work, because all the novels are quite old now. My last two books were both collections, and I would probably recommend them because I think I'm most at ease with, again, the voice in them. I feel they're reflective, both collections. I feel they're reflective of what I'm. You're right. These questions do make writers uncomfortable because you just. I'm so terrified of falling into the pretentious trap. Um,
Yeah, I know.
but yeah, it's like I do think those reflect the voice I hope to convey to the audience. And whereas I'm perfectly proud of the older novels, like all of us, I'm very aware now. I mean, literally, my first novel is now, I can't do the math, is 34 years old. Um, so, I mean, leaving aside all the usual, there's no cell phones, cable TV is a new invention, all the sort of historical weirdnesses. There's also, a, there are long sections in that book that make me cringe when I read it now because I hadn't really honed my voice at that point. Like, I still think the story is good. I'd be happy. So I guess I'd like them to read the two collections first. And then when they've decided they
Yeah.
like me, they can go back and read the novels and forgive me for the for the writerliness of
Hmm.
particularly the first one. I mean, I think when I look back at it now, I can literally see me discovering the voice I wanted to use in that book because there are sections where I'm trying to be a writer, and those are, of course, the worst sections. And then there's other sections where I learn to let the characters talk to each other. And it's like, oh, that's okay. That sounds like me now. So I guess if anybody is foolish enough to want to take a sample, pick up one of the two recent collections, I think.
Excellent. So we're almost at the very end.
Okay.
Um, Pete, I would like to say a massive thank you to you.
Oh,
This
thank
won't
you.
be goodbye though, Pete, because hopefully we will be doing the Hellraiser special with Trevor. But
Great.
and we will be going quite in depth into your screenwriting career. So for anyone who's watching, this is why we haven't really looked at that today.
Sure.
Um, Trevor, thank you very much for
Always a
being on
pleasure.
the podcast. Fantastic to have you here. And Pete, for people who want to find your books, where would be the best place to look for them?
I guess if you've found me on social media and then click, the link tree everybody has, I've got a link tree to, well, all the usual places. Um, I'm on, I still want to call it Twitter. I'm on X. I'm on X and Instagram and one other, either Threads or Blue Sky as Limey Bastard 55. And I'm on Facebook under my own name. And um, you'll certainly find, like all of us, you know, at every possible excuse, I'll be posting links to to the books. I usually try and disguise them as here's a funny thing that happened to me the other day, and it reminded me of an incident in one of my novels, linking comments. So I always try to present them as anecdotal amusements, but they're really just naked huckstering. So if you find me on social media, you can easily find links to the books, but there will be a link tree thing and a link to the Amazon author page. I'm very lucky. Everything I've written is I want to say currently in print if you include ebooks and audiobooks. There's a couple of them that aren't technically still in print, but everything I've done is still available as an ebook. Most of them, in fact, as physical books. So yeah, I've babbled about it enough. Yeah, I'm easy to find. Just find me on social media and follow the links.
And one more thing, even though it's actually connected to your screenwriting, it is
Yeah,
the last thing that you've recently done. Are we
yeah.
allowed to mention that if people want to catch up with you in terms of screenwriting, to tune in to is it Netflix for Oh no, it's Amazon
Oh, it's Amazon Prime. Yeah,
for Good Omens, the final chapter of that.
the
Yeah.
finale. Yeah, yeah. Good Omens was going to be. There'd been two excellent seasons, and then I was lucky enough to be asked to be one of the three-person writing team
Yeah.
on a full season. Um, it was Neil, obviously, and it was Mike Marshall Smith, another old friend. And we did, in fact, write a whole season, but then as I tactfully put it on the Facebook post, when circumstances changed and
Yeah.
Amazon decided they only wanted a 90-minute movie,
Yeah.
we boiled it down. Um, so yeah, I mean, it has been the only update on my IMDb page in the last 13 years. So so it's nice now when I look at the IMDb page, I can see this sort of, oh, he first worked in 1988 and now he has a 2026 credit. And it's like, oh, he must be fucking ancient. Um, but it's nice to get another credit on there. So so yeah, people can see that. And of course, as with the books, again, I'm very lucky. The movies I wrote are still available both on streaming platforms and as DVDs. Very nice recent box sets for all of them actually have
Yeah.
come out. So yeah, I'm very aware of my good fortune that if you happen to like my nonsense, all my nonsense is pretty freely available out there. So, and again, guys, thanks. It's I
Thanks,
feel like
Pete.
we've just been sitting in the pub having a nice chat,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
That's the
yeah.
way to do it. Yeah.
best kind of
Yeah.
interview.
Which
So
is
thank you very
which
much.
is great. Yeah, I hope that when people watch, they appreciate that approach to it as well, which is just three people having a good chat.
Having a
So
natter.
once again, guys, thanks very much. It was great having you on. I'm going to do a countdown, which is just for me. So 3, 2, 1.